Back in the early 1920s, Los Angeles wasn't just growing, it was exploding. Oil was shooting out of the ground like money from a slot machine. Hollywood was turning into the dream factory of America, and people were pouring in from all over the country hoping to get rich. But while most were fighting for scraps, one man had already won the game. Edward L Doheny was sitting on one of the biggest oil fortunes in the world. He wasn't just a millionaire, he was a kingmaker. His companies pulled crude from beneath California soil by the millions of barrels, and he used that money to influence everything around him. If you were a politician, judge, or business leader in LA during this time, chances are Doheny either paid your salary or owned the building you worked in. He donated to churches, hospitals, libraries, and schools. On the surface, he looked like the perfect example of the American dream. But behind all that philanthropy was a ruthless operator who used backroom deals and dirty money to climb his way to the top. And when things got ugly, he made sure the mess never touched him. The most infamous example of how deep his reach went was something called the Teapot Dome Scandal, a name that sounds kind of cute until you realize it was one of the most corrupt government deals in U.S. history. Teapot Dome was a Navy-owned oil reserve in Wyoming, and Doheny wanted in. But he didn't want to compete. He didn't want bids. He just wanted access handed to him on a silver platter. So instead of going the legal route, he went the quiet one. In 1921, he gave a $100,000 loan, which today would be worth almost $2 million, to a man named Albert Fall, who just so happened to be the Secretary of the Interior under President Harding. That money bought him exactly what he wanted: exclusive drilling rights, no competition, no oversight, just a wink and a signature. And it worked until reporters started sniffing around and Congress got involved. But even the bribe itself wasn't the wildest part of the story. The way the money was delivered sounds more like a scene from a noir film than real life. Doheny didn't wire the funds or use a lawyer. He sent his own son, Edward "Ned" Doheny Jr., along with Ned's close friend and personal secretary, Hugh Plunkett, on a covert mission to hand-deliver the briefcase full of cash straight to Fall's home in Washington, D.C. These were two young, well-connected men acting as bagmen for one of the wealthiest tycoons in the country. And they pulled it off without a hitch, or so it seemed. For a while, everything went quiet. But when the Teapot Dome scandal finally blew up, people started asking questions. Subpoenas were flying, and suddenly both Ned and Plunkett were being looked at as potential witnesses. That's when things took a deadly turn. On the night of February 16, 1929, just weeks before Ned and Plunkett were expected to testify, both men ended up dead inside the Doheny family mansion, a place that would later be known as Greystone. The official story was shocking and simple. Plunkett had a nervous breakdown, shot Ned in a fit of rage, and then turned the gun on himself. The media called it a tragic case of mental illness. The Doheny family called it a private matter. And the police? They called it closed. But if you look even a little bit deeper, the story falls apart. Plunkett had no documented mental issues, no history of violence, and no motive that made any real sense. He had been like a brother to Ned for years. They traveled together, worked side by side, and even lived on the same property. Why would he snap out of nowhere, right before both of them were due in court? Then there was the actual crime scene, which felt more like a cover-up than a real investigation. Instead of calling the police immediately, the Doheny family summoned their personal physician, who arrived at the mansion before authorities and had access to the entire room where the bodies were found. By the time LAPD detectives showed up, any useful evidence had already been compromised, if not straight up destroyed. The gun placement, the body positions, the timeline, none of it added up. And somehow, even though this was a double shooting in one of the wealthiest homes in Beverly Hills, the story just kind of disappeared. No grand jury, no press frenzy, no deep dive. The narrative was carefully managed from the top down. This wasn't just damage control, it was a masterclass in how the elite protect their own. And while this whole mess was unfolding, Edward Doheny Sr. kept doing what he did best: spinning the narrative. He poured more money into public institutions. He broke ground on massive construction projects. He became even more charitable, donating millions to schools and churches. His name was everywhere, on libraries, auditoriums, even medical research centers. It was like he was burying the scandal under a mountain of good deeds. And the press, they played along. They covered the deaths, but never challenged the official version. They tiptoed around the implications. It was as if Doheny's wealth came with a built-in silence clause. In a city obsessed with fame and fortune, no one wanted to be the one to accuse LA's richest man of murder, or at the very least, complicity. Eventually, the Teapot Dome scandal reached trial, and here's the kicker. Albert Fall was found guilty of accepting the bribe. He went to prison, the first U.S. cabinet member in history to do so. But Edward Doheny? He walked. The jury took just a few hours to decide that he was innocent. They believed his defense that the $100,000 was just a personal loan between friends. No strings attached. Nothing shady, just rich guys helping each other out. Never mind the fact that everyone else involved ended up dead or disgraced. Doheny stayed on top. The scandal barely made a dent. If anything, it boosted his reputation as a survivor, a man who had weathered the storm and kept building LA into the empire it was becoming. After his son's death, Doheny didn't hide away in shame. He went bigger. He built a massive memorial, the Doheny Library at USC, as a tribute to Ned. He made sure his son's name would be remembered for generations, not as the guy who delivered a bribe or died under suspicious circumstances, but as a tragic hero. And Greystone Mansion, the site of the shooting, was eventually donated to the city. Today, it's a public park. You can walk the grounds, take photos, even rent it out for weddings. But there's no mention of the blood that was spilled there, no plaque, no reminder that this beautiful estate was once the center of one of the most mysterious and controversial deaths in LA history. That's the real legacy of Edward Doheny. A man who didn't just buy oil fields and political favors, he bought silence, he bought history, he built an empire so massive that it swallowed its own darkest secrets. And the craziest part? Most people have never even heard his name, because when you're rich enough, powerful enough, and careful enough, you don't just get away with murder, you get celebrated for it.